In this video, I propose to share some thoughts which I assume to be of particular relevance to the youth anywhere in the world. Though the relevance of these insights is not limited strictly to the youth, it can be valuable, relevant to people of every age in every place. The main theme in this video is a theme that's not often dealt with, which is the theme of healthy personality or health in personality or wholesome personality, or in the case of those whose personality health is compromised, healing personality. How is personality to be healed? The reason I say that the content of this video is particularly relevant to the youth is that that's a phase in our life, in human life, when people are particularly concerned about and obsessed with personality development, and it is right and proper that it is so. So these insights, and I can vouch from personal experience, are invaluable in this context or in this connection. The episode from the public ministry of Jesus Christ, which I propose to keep as the point of reference to guide our thought, is found in the 5th chapter of St. John's Gospel, the Gospel according to St. John, chapter 5. It's a familiar episode. I have often in the past referred to this episode and drawn many insights from this episode. But obviously, such as episodes are almost inexhaustible in their meanings. They can communicate many meanings and many insights to people in different situations, stations, and stages of life. Therefore, you will find the content of this video strikingly fresh and unprecedented. Now, in this episode, people are waiting beside a pool. The name of the pool is the Pool of Bethesda, waiting to be healed. And as the text says, now and then an angel will come and stir the waters of the pool, and whoever manages to get into the pool first, that is, immediately after the waters of the pool are stirred by the angel, they will be healed of their infirmities, diseases, whatever they be. But there was a man among the many who had gathered there, waiting for their turn to be healed. There was one man who had been, so to speak, a record holder, who had been waiting for 38 long years, but his turn never came. And Jesus comes and encounters this very person and confronts him, quite surprisingly, with a question which no one except Jesus would have dared to ask or would have thought of asking. Can you imagine asking somebody who had been waiting for 38 years at a particular place, waiting to be healed, asking such a question, such a person the question, do you want to be healed? Do you want to be healed? From a worldly, logical point of view, this is the most absurd question to ask. Imagine a person who had been waiting for 38 years, not 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 8 years, 38 long years. He had been waiting to be healed. And then imagine the temerity and the impropriety, if you like, of asking him the question, do you want to be healed? Really? Do you want to be healed? Now, when you re examine this episode, suddenly it strikes you that it makes eminent sense that if a person had been waiting for 38 years and nothing happened to him, while all around him people were being healed, then there was something very special about him, something that remained hidden about him within himself, and perhaps that remained hidden even from himself. Now, I'm reminded of a particular episode which came up for discussion in the Executive Committee of Christian Medical College Vellore when I was a member of that committee. The point or the instance that was discussed was that there was a case of a patient who used to come to the hospital every now and then, rescued from his attempts to commit suicide. He had been already helped from the brink of death by the hospital 6 times. Now, for the 7th time, he had been readmitted. So, the point that was discussed was the point that was raised for discussion was whether a hospital should waste its resources, the time of its medical team, doctors, nurses, etc., on such a person who has already attempted suicide 6 times. Now, the point of the matter is, on the face of it, it's obvious that this was a case of a person who attempted suicide without actually wanting to die. There are such cases, and they're not all that infrequent. Anyway, it's not the time for me to take you into the details of the discussion that ensued. The conclusion was that yes, irrespective of how many times a person commits suicide, if the case has been brought to the hospital is duty bound to provide the best medical care to him. Now, this is a situation somewhat similar, if not identical. And Jesus asked the question that I've already cited: do you want to be healed? Now, the question is, and this is where young people should particularly focus their attention, what's the point that Jesus is making here? Jesus is referring to a particular outlook, a particular inner state, which is relevant not only to this person, but this is of universal relevance. Otherwise, the episode would not have been recorded in the gospel narrative. Far too many people are in a predicament similar to that of this person who had been waiting to be healed but could not be healed. And what was the problem, and where was the problem? Jesus diagnoses the problem amazingly, most extraordinarily. And this is a case that doctors should study in elaborate detail, and that would enable them to understand many things about the profession that they practice, the noble profession that they practice. Now, the problem with this man, and that is what young people must understand particularly, is and has been that he had developed a state, an inner state, an outlook on life, an attitude to life, dominated entirely by the psychology of dependence. Dependence. I'm using this word advisedly because that's the most crucial word in our conversation so far. The real disease, the real ailment, the real disability that this person was suffering from was not any organic illness, was not even a psychological problem in the usual sense of the term. It's more of a social problem, a problem that is created by well-meaning people, by the kind of conditioning that they impart to people out of very good intentions, no doubt. But it does serious harm to people, particularly vis-a-vis their personality formation in a wholesome manner. Very many people, parents of all description, and I can look into my own heart and I find and confess to you that I was not entirely free from this terrible streak in my nature. Far too many people want to promote this arrangement of, and if you like, the psychology of dependence in relation to others. People derive some kind of subhuman, even malicious delight in recognizing that so and so, so and so, so and so, or a host of people are dependent on them. Not only that, we also assume that's very healthy and desirable for people to be dependent on various institutions, systems, provisions, means, and agencies external to them. Now, this problem must be clearly understood. What's the fundamental problem here? The more you are dependent on persons, resources, agencies, institutions, forces external to you, the more disempowered you become. Dependence breeds disability. Dependence is a state in which your own potentialities and powers are suppressed, inhibited, and you are never allowed to give them free play. As a result, this seriously inhibits the blossoming of your personality, and the longer this state continues, the more skeptical you become of your own abilities, and therefore you become all the more convinced of your need to depend more and more completely on others, as many people external to you, as many agencies external to you as possible. And I have to say that those who have no value for the personality of others, or those who want to use others for their benefit, whether they be in the realm of politics, or in the realm of religion, or in any other field of life, they do all they can to promote this arrangement or this mentality of dependence on those within the areas of their influence. It's good for them, but it's bad. It's very bad indeed for those who are thus infected with this psychology of dependence. Now think of this man. I'm not saying that he acquired this particular mental conditioning after his arrival at the Pool of Bethesda. No, this infliction happened, this crippling of his personality happened a long time before he reached there. That was why he needed to come to the Pool of Bethesda in the first place. But the fact that he was in an area where he could have uh, experienced healing made no difference in his life. Why? Because even there, the same problem haunted him, crippled him, inhibited him, and prevented him from making full use or even marginal use of the possibilities in that context. Very often, people blame everything on their circumstances. They blame everything on their colleagues, everything on the institution, everything on the system, etc. But the fact of the matter is that their personality suffered serious crippling at the hands of those who were in charge of their formation, which is spread over a variety of agencies, starting from home, going on to education, religious formation, public life, public opinion, political conditioning, and cultural conditioning. In fact, if you become aware of this, you'll be startled, you will be actually worried to realize that the total environment in which we are growing up and we are living is full of agencies that want to infect every individual with the psychology of dependence. For example, think of a political leader. He'll be very keen to infect the people of the whole country with the idea that he is indispensable, which means that it's good for the entire nation. In India, 1.4 billion people to depend entirely on him. If anything happens to him, the country will go to the dogs, or dogs will come to the country. The best that you can do is to depend on me entirely. The moment I go, what happens to you? Well, woe unto you. Now, people are very keen to infect you with this terribly crippling idea that it's a great blessing for you to be in the state of dependence and disability. Now, I have to point out, think of the family, for the family formation. Now, there, of course, I have to point out that it's a tightrope walk. On the one hand, there is parental authority, and you can't have a home without parental authority. But parents have to be particularly wise and discerning to realize that between their duty to pass on to their children certain fundamental values and ideals and a certain degree of discipline in their life, and crippling them by burdening with whatever has happened in the past and the stereotypical notions about what children's obligations by their parents are, and the serious harm that they're doing to their children without knowing it, out of good intentions, but nonetheless creating in them this mentality or this psychology of dependence. Now, let's consider one aspect of it. Think of a boy, the son in the house. Now, parents, out of their great affection, greater affection for sons than for daughters, no? And this does far greater harm to sons than to daughters. That's the reason why our sons are becoming inferior to our daughters. So, what do? We promote in our sons a greater degree of dependence on parents by showering them our affection, by not allowing them to do anything for themselves. It's understandable if daughters have to do everything for themselves, but as for our sons, no, they should not do anything for themselves. They should not make their beds, they should not keep their rooms tidy, they should not even pack their school bag. And if possible, parents will brush their teeth for them right up to the age of 10, 12, 13. I've seen parents feeding their sons who are 9 years old, 10 years old. I've seen it. There's no exaggeration. And such mothers would think that they're doing a great service, that they're sacrificing themselves at the altar of parental perfection. They're actually killing their sons. What happens? Sons who are brought up in this manner and are infected with this psychology of conditioning, when they go to schools and colleges, they need someone or the other to depend on. And they invariably fall into the hands of the wrong people. And this plays a huge role in promoting truancy in schools and colleges, as well as drug addiction and alcohol addiction. Because such children will do anything except any condition to belong to a group without that crutch, they cannot stand upright. And the price that this particular group exacts is that your darling son should do everything that they do, which includes maybe alcohol, maybe experimenting with drugs or what have you, God forbid. But we don't realize that the root of this weakness lies back home, the kind of parenting that was inflicted on the child. So, what is demonstrated through the instance of this man who was so woefully, heartbreakingly devoid of any initiative, any willingness to take himself seriously, any inclination to believe that there was any possibility or energy or power in him. And not surprisingly, as is to be only expected, he lay there without receiving or without experiencing any healing or empowerment. Now consider how Jesus deals with him, how Jesus heals him. Jesus makes him confront his real problem. His problem was the state of dependence. So, what is the antidote to this dependence? Orient him to the opposite direction. So now Jesus tells him that he is not only capable of looking after himself, but capable also of looking after others. That's called true revolution. That's called healing. That's why Jesus tells him, take up your bed and go home. Take up your bed and go home. So far, you were under the wrong impression that somebody had to carry you on this bed. You were also under the wrong impression all this while, all those 38 years that you've been waiting beside the pool of Bethesda, that somebody needed to come and throw you into the pool. You could do nothing by yourself, nothing for yourself. That's all the result of the very bad, crippling conditioning that you had suffered. Perhaps you are not to blame in this. This was inflicted on you. But I say to you, this is not your true state. This is not who you are. You have a dimension, you have a possibility, you have a scope, you have an energy and a power which is absolutely incredible. And that is something that you need to realize and admit to yourself. So, what is happening here, my friends, is by way of healing, and I believe that all healing involves this particular principle one way or another. The true principle of healing, which is at work here and which is also at work in every instance of healing, is this: that the person concerned, the person to be healed, is reoriented, or his nature turned in a different direction, reoriented from the psychology of dependence to a psychology of activity. Activity. And that is the fundamental healing. Now you will understand, if you'll examine in the light of this particular insight I've shared with you, the teachings of Jesus Christ, in particular, the very pronounced emphasis he lays on the duty to act. You will understand that his teaching is meant to have a healing effect on us. How does the Sermon on the Mount end? He says, "He who hears these words of mine and does them." Why should we do what we know? Because it's by doing what we know that we experience true freedom, true empowerment. Doing is the activity. Listening is passivity. Passivity has to be transformed into activity for personality to be healed. Now, this insight is of particular importance at this age of media. As is well known, the impact of television as well as computer, etc., cell phone, is that all these gadgets induce passivity in us. Physical passivity, which is manifest. We simply sit somewhere, we become couch potatoes. But beyond that, we become also intellectually passive. Because all the time we are bombarded with images and sounds. Our brain does not have to act. We simply sit there passively and receive whatever is deposited into us. And this creates a psychology of dependence. That's the reason why you find far fewer people today as compared to the situation half a century ago, 50 years ago, who are actually active, dynamic. Vitality is being drained out of us. And we have to be particularly aware of this problem and do all that we can to counter this process and to preserve in us that zest, that activity, that vitality in us, without which we are as good as dead. So think of life in terms of the two terminals. This terminal is passive, receptivity, merely hearing, receptivity. Hearing is necessary, but not every kind of hearing is useful. The other terminal is freedom, receptivity and dependence here, freedom and activity on the other. These are the two terminals. And life cannot be all activity, because we also have to listen, learn, understand, on the basis of which we have to act. And sometimes then, having acted, we realize that we need to understand more. So we have to become passive, we have to meditate, we have to read, we have to reflect, We have to analyze, we have to go deeper into the realities of life, assume, acquire, attain a fresh understanding of things, and again on the basis of that act. So life is perhaps you can imagine life as a pendulum that swings between the two terminals of receptivity and dependence, and activity and freedom. You experience freedom only when you act. Now, I have to say one word more before I close, and that is there is a point at which receptivity, passivity, that particular syndrome, and activity and freedom become one. Please understand this very clearly. Receptivity and passivity, dependence, receptivity and dependence is the one terminal, one extreme. The other is activity and freedom. Dependence, freedom; receptivity, activity. There is a condition, there is only one context in human life, in the entire horizon of human life, in which both become one. The two terminals become one. That is receptivity dependence terminal and activity freedom terminal become one, and that is God, in whom everything is complete, everything is one. In God, the two terminals become one, and therefore the biblical teaching that listening to Him and obeying Him is perfect freedom, because the proof that we actually listen to God, the proof that we love God, the proof that we obey God is that we act. And activity actualizes freedom. And that can be absolutely trusted and should be trusted absolutely only in relation to our relationship with God, in no other context. In every other context, there must be a gap between, a wide gap between reception and dependence and action and freedom. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll hear something from somebody, immediately jump at it, and you do, and you come to regret. There must be a gap, both in space and time, between what you hear and what you do. I'm not saying that you should ignore all that you hear. You should listen to people with great respect, great expectation, but don't jump at everything. Be convinced that what you are planning to do is in conformity with the truth of your being, which also can be understood only if you abide in God and God in you, that higher principle. If what you feel like doing after exposing yourself to this particular source of influence harmonizes with the central reality in you, then go ahead and do it, and that will result in greater freedom. On the other hand, you have heard something from the source, and suddenly you feel excited about it, but your conscience tells you that that's not the way, but still you go ahead and do it. What happens? Rather than becoming more free through activity or action, your freedom gets more compromised. Well, there's a great deal that needs to be said about it, but the constraints of time does not allow me. So, looking at this person who is healed, you cannot understand why Jesus said to this man, "Take up your bed and walk," in any other light. Absolutely, in no other light. Jesus is trying to orient this man from his accustomed passivity, receptivity, dependence, that's his disease, personality disease, to a completely different state in which he is able to act based on his best convictions. And then he becomes a person with an impact on the world around him. And this man, going back home, carrying the bed which carried him till then, becomes a sign of empowerment. And this is the idea of a healed personality. To be healed is to become impactful. And that's why Jesus says, "You are the light of the world." Light is a symbol of the impact, the beneficial impact that every one of us can develop so long as we live in harmony with that higher possibilities that we refer to as God, Allah, Ishar, Khuda, what have you. So that's the heart of this episode, the episode of Jesus healing the man, the invalid who had been waiting for 38 long years. Just imagine, 38 long years beside the pool of Bethesda. And I often wonder what would have happened to him if Jesus had not come to him in that condition to deliver him of himself. Himself. He was himself the disease. And therefore, he had to be himself the healing. Hence, the instruction, take up your bed and walk. This is the message. Get up and walk. Get up and walk. Get up and walk. You'll be healed. You'll be healed. May you be healed. May I be healed. Let's all walk.